The Technologist podcast with Coach Dennis. This time with me, Jonathan, who charismatically and humbly calls himself the Tiny DevOps.
Yeah.
Jonathan, welcome.
Hi. Thanks for having me. This is fun. Looking forward to this.
Jonathan, what is the niche of Tiny DevOps getting like enterprise, perhaps even big tech level DevOps, the startup small companies? That seems like an amazing niche. How
Yeah.
did you come up with that? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. Two great questions there. What is it, and how did I come up with it? So, maybe first, what is it? I think DevOps in particular, and a lot of technology, but DevOps in particular, gets a lot of attention with regard to large companies. We're always looking at how does Netflix do it, how does Google do it, 10,000 Kubernetes nodes, this sort of stuff, and that all the conference talks and the famous YouTube videos are all about these big companies doing amazing things. But the truth is, most of us never work at big companies. Maybe there's 100 developers or 50 or 20 or 5 at most companies, at least at some point in our careers. And so Tiny DevOps is about addressing DevOps to those people, or people who are either in that situation or might be at some point in the future. How did I come up with that? Well, I've worked in a large variety of sizes of companies. The smallest, I was the only developer for a while. We grew to 2 and then 3. The largest was probably Booking.com, where at the time I think there were 1,000 developers. And I just found that I actually appreciate the problems that the small companies face more than the big companies. Part of that has to do with just the pace of change. At large companies, making a change can take months or years, depending on the kind of change you're trying to make. As one example, at Booking.com, I tried to introduce GitLab. Before that, they were not using any. They were using headless Git, so just from the command line, right? Push and pull, and that's all. So I started to introduce GitLab, and had minimal success while I was there. But after I left, 2.5 years later, they adopted GitLab. So if I had stuck around long enough, I would have been able to see the benefits of my efforts. But I didn't want to necessarily commit to 2.5, 3, 4, 5 years for every change. I think is a good one to put in place. And based on my experience working at other smaller companies, I don't know. It's for one thing, you can have a crazy idea, try it out, and maybe go into production with it in the course of days or weeks sometimes. I mean, you can sometimes in large companies too, but it's easier in a small company. So I feel like I can feel the impact better there, and just I have a personal affinity for the smaller companies and the problems they face. So my mission with Tiny DevOps is to help the smaller companies see the benefits of DevOps software delivery practices without necessarily having the budget or the manpower of Google and Netflix.
Google and Netflix. It sounds like, going slightly back on your answer, you said it's hard to do these kind of changes in big companies. Is DevOps something so fundamentally infrastructural that you need to change it in one go across the entire company?
In one go? No. In fact, I would say that that's the wrong approach to DevOps, regardless of the size of the company.
Jonathan, before we go on a tangent, this is a comment on, you said it's hard to do, like a small DevOps change in a big company. Is that, did I miss the mark on like why it's hard to do?
Okay, yeah, let me address that. So what I mean by that is, just using the example of adopting GitLab or any new tool. Maybe you want to introduce Redis or something.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Suppose that you have a problem that Redis is the perfect solution for. In a small company, you can say, let's try Redis. Okay, we'll install it. We'll play with it. It looks like it's solving the problem. Let's go ahead and put up a production instance. And maybe that process, best case, takes a few days. At a large company, you're probably looking at weeks or months for the same change because there's probably more teams involved. There might be governance involved. Maybe you had to go through some sort of security audit, and who knows? There could be 1,000 different things. In my case with GitLab, the biggest obstacle to overcome at Booking was just getting people to try it and use it, and convincing them that there was a problem to be solved, because they were kind of, their mindset and the culture of the company at that time was, we do things this way, and trying to introduce it to other people. I had of course from the beginning, a certain small set of people were interested in it, or else it would have gone nowhere. But getting that to a critical mass takes a lot longer when you have 1,000 people to convince than when you have to convince your 3 colleagues who sit across the cube from you.
So on the note of like, replacing a vendor in large companies, let's say it's super expensive because it's for a large team, it's a large enterprise scale undertaking, and there's probably a yearly budget for that. And somebody's probably budgeting with that vendor, and there's probably some contracts there that you might not have with a small team. Is this agility, let's call it lowercase a, agility, that small companies experience, it's not obvious to me that is a factor of scale itself. Is there something else in the mentality there that I missed? What is surrounding this nuance?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be. I mean, there are definitely large companies that can make quick decisions and do. Those
actually, if I can chime in,
yeah,
I was looking more for the example of a small company that is adopting that corporate mentality way too early, and they also find it difficult to change a vendor.
So both of those happen, right? But yeah, to your broader point, it's not directly a function of the company size. There's something else there that's involved. That's something I suppose could be maybe dismissively called culture. I mean, we like to throw that label on lots of things, and then it's like, oh, it's culture, so we're not going to bother with that. And I don't mean it that way, because a big part of DevOps and agility is changing the culture. But yeah, definitely there are small companies who try to, either successfully or not, to sort of maybe punch above their weight, take on, and maybe it's good reasons, maybe it's not. I don't know. It's not my place to judge that. But yeah, certainly some small companies have an extra layer of bureaucracy for good reasons or bad. Maybe it's compliance related because they're, I'm working with a fintech right now. It could be that sort of thing, and they can't just switch vendors because maybe the new vendor isn't PCI compliant or whatever the case is. So yeah, there's definitely cases like that. But even so, on net, I think that it's generally easier for smaller companies to make changes quickly.
And we keep throwing around this phrase of small company. What is a small company?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Like, when it's probably a range. So what tests can we do? Our listeners, perhaps, what tests can they do to figure out whether they're in a small company or not?
Right. So the way I define that for the purpose of Tiny DevOps is 20 engineers or fewer. And that is a broad range, because you could have, WhatsApp sold with 50 engineers, I think, when they were acquired. And, so, you could be doing 20 engineers could be doing billions of dollars of revenue, or they might be barely breaking even or even losing money, depending on the state of the company. So, but I focus on that just because it's an easy metric to look at. Look around you. Do you have 20 colleagues? Okay, then you're in the range. Do you have more than that? Okay, then you're starting to get out of my area of expertise.
Is this coming close to like the Dunbar number? Because that's in that ballpark, right?
So yeah, I think that the Dunbar number is well, I guess the one that people quote the most, I think, is 150. But that's not like close colleagues, right? That's like how many people can you know without forgetting?
I was referencing 23.
Yeah,
so or 27,
I think,
or
yeah. But like in terms of like your close circle, I think, I don't remember the number. It's probably 23 or 27. So yeah, I guess it is close to that. That wasn't obviously, it wasn't my intention to correlate those, or I would have remembered the number. But
so our viewers and listeners who don't know, the Dunbar number is an estimation of how many social connections you can have in a tribe or in an organization before it starts disintegrating, where the tribe requires splitting apart or some form of external governance. So that is perhaps an organic example would be a natural size for a family. A family bigger than that starts operating in two parallels. So size. Is there anything else?
That's really how I define it. Because it's simple, it's overly simplistic, intentionally so. Just to give my audience a quick.
So that's the KISS test. That's the
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
a good advice I got from Oshri Cohen on how to test this, because he sort of has the same audience, at least the same filter. He told me that he just checks the titles in the company. If the company has a CTO and a senior dev, and that's it, they're probably a good fit.
Yeah.
But once you have CPOs, VP of engineering, president of engineering, deputy, whatever, then that's org scale 500 plus, and the lines blur.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, there are exceptions. I'm actually working with a company right now where I am the VP of engineering, and we have 8 engineers. Although we don't have a CTO, so I don't know. Maybe it doesn't quite match.
That's interesting. That's interesting.
But so, yeah, I mean, I think we're on the same track there.
So I have it in my show notes that the Commodore 64 was your first computer, and it happened to be my first computer as well. It was my brother's, and I was young enough to remember it, using it and playing Donald Duck on it and Wizards of War and those games. You and I together are old enough to have started our engineering tech careers in a time where DevOps wasn't a thing.
Right.
From my perspective, my bias was that DevOps was something that naturally evolved from SysOps, from the infrastructure IT side. If I separate engineering and IT from that sort of bureaucratic IT sphere of like low-level networking, low-level connections, hardware management. It seems nowadays it's more about processes and humans, and more about interoperability between teams that have different topologies. What's your, Eli 5 DevOps, what is it today for you?
Today, it depends on who you ask. I mean, I have my own definition, which I think is close to what it's, the spirit of what it was meant to be, but it means all sorts of things to different people. And that's sad. I think it's suffering the same problem that the word agile is suffering, that it's just kind of become a buzzword that people use in any way they want to get attention, to sell products. I mean, when you have companies like Microsoft and GitLab selling tools with the word DevOps in the title, that's just confusing. I mean,
but that's marketing,
DevOps,
right? That's the same way that microservices is being misused as a sort of misnomer for MASH or...
Okay, but at least microservices is a thing that you can point to. DevOps shouldn't be.
So that sounds, it's very human and process-centered rather than something a machine does.
I believe so, yeah. I mean, I think that the way... A litmus test I like to use for the word DevOps, whether it's being used correctly, is can you replace it in a sentence with the word collaboration? If you can, you're probably using it correctly. If you cannot, I mean, Microsoft collaboration, actually, they probably would call a tool that.
They would. Collaboration.net.
Yes. But let's say the typical DevOps team. Do you have a collaboration team at your company? And would that make sense to have a team that does the collaboration? We have 6 teams over here. They're all doing their individual thing. And then one team over here does collaboration. That doesn't make sense to me from a grammatical sense. So, if you can replace the word DevOps with collaboration, you're probably on the right track. We do DevOps here. We do collaboration here. Okay, great. I'm a DevOps engineer. I'm a collaboration engineer. What does that mean? I don't know what that means. So that's kind of the litmus test I use. That's overly simplistic, because DevOps is more than just collaboration, because people have been collaborating since the dawn of man, and they haven't been doing DevOps, I suppose, all that time.
Jonathan, if a company doesn't have anybody with the title DevOps, how does stuff get into production?
There are many ways, of course.
Like, if I call DevOps collaboration, right, and I replace that word with, oh, we don't have any DevOps engineers, I use that word in that context. Is it the devs that are doing ops? They just don't call themselves that? Is every engineer automatically in somehow DevOps oriented, or is there a line? Is it something QA or product?
If there's a line, that's a strong indication you're not doing DevOps.
If there's a line, there's a strong indication that you're not doing DevOps. So DevOps is something that encompasses the entire engineering department,
I
at
would say
least
so.
the engineering
Yes,
department.
possibly the entire company.
So it is a misnomer for agile practices, perhaps in that context.
I would, if you're
Capital
doing
A, agile.
I would say there's a strong correlation between capital A agile and DevOps in a job title or team title.
Okay,
if that
so
answers the question.
yeah, so what I'm aiming at is that, you said you're a VP of engineering in your company now. I'm not sure whether you're hired, whether you're like fractional or external, internal. But what your promise is, you're delivering DevOps. Like this is the same product, right? You're delivering tiny DevOps, you big tech DevOps to a small growing company.
Right.
It sounds like you have to contribute in some way also as an engineer in order to do that, or is it more coaching style? Are you like a DevOps coach, like there's capital A agile coaches, or are you like an engineer who's just very mature and you're mature on the DevOps track of a engineering lifestyle? Like where does it, I want to put it into a box if I can.
Okay,
if there's a line.
We'll try. Yeah. So the company I'm working for is called Hubuc, Hubuc. They're a B2B fintech, just for a little bit of context. And I am doing a little bit of everything you said. This company uses Go for the back end, and I'm a Go developer. So I'm doing coding. I am coaching the teams on DevOps practices, implementing continuous integration and delivery. I am helping them adopt pair programming practices, extreme programming types of things, test-driven development, and doing the sort of normal things that a VP or CTO might do, sitting in on meetings about PCI compliance and talking to clients and vendors, and those sorts of things, the sort of boring things that nobody actually is excited about doing, but are necessary for business to happen. So I'm kind of wearing all the hats that you kind of went through there in this particular role. I don't always get as hands-on as I am here. Sometimes I'm more distant, more how shall I say, more like advisory. Like here's some things to try. Go do this with your team. It depends on what the company I'm working with needs at the time.
In my experience, DevOps has always been a sort of secondary hire. You get the engineering team down, the product team down, the financial side of it down, and then DevOps would be something that you introduce into the company officially as you go from 4 people in the company to 10 engineers, right? So you go from 5 + 2 to 10 + 10. And that's when we start talking about DevOps. That's my bias.
Yeah. So I think that probably comes out of the idea that when do you need a dedicated operations person or something like that, right? And I think in that regard, that's often true. Once you start to get to about 10 or 12, it depends on what you're doing. But yeah, 10, 12 engineers is often about the time when you need a dedicated operations person to manage your AWS or whatever you're deploying to. But I think of that as distinct from the original intention of DevOps, which is, it's confusing because when you look at where DevOps came from, it came out of a large company that had a wall between development and operations. And they were, how do we bridge this gap? And when you're growing from a very small point where there's no wall yet, at what point do you call it DevOps? I mean, can you only have DevOps if you built a wall and torn it down first? Maybe.
Jonathan.
Yeah.
In the context of that company, that's using that example from earlier about going, the small company growing. It seems to me it's very obvious that it's the DevOps line of when to introduce one. It's the same time you would introduce your first sort of team lead or engineering manager. So perhaps it's somewhere up there in the sort of process management side. And the company you mentioned that had that line, they had a very mature staff engineering and sort of tech specialist lane, but a very limited sort of infrastructure QA side of things. So there was a huge imbalance between how does the product test stuff, and how many engineers are working on many things in parallel. Is that more? There seems to be a natural tendency to conflate DevOps work with some kind of infrastructure and QA cooperation towards the product and engineering side. When you do DevOps, when you say we're gonna take you from bad DevOps to or no DevOps or unintentional DevOps, unconscious DevOps to like mature DevOps, what is the difference between those two companies? The before after state.
So my goal, my end goal with the companies I'm working with, is that when I'm done with them, they have developers who are empowered to release software into production quickly, efficiently, and safely, and that they're able to, deliver valuable, customer value very quickly. That doesn't sound like DevOps necessarily right away, but the way we get there, DevOps is a way to get there. It's a way of so what I see happening a lot the wrong way. In fact, the first time I ever heard the word DevOps was at a company I was working at, where they introduced a DevOps team that was sort of the gatekeeper between me and production. I was a developer. There's a DevOps team, and then production on the other side. And when I needed something, I had to ask DevOps to do it for me. And honestly, that's not what DevOps is supposed to be. DevOps is supposed to be empowering the developer to do that themselves. There's different ways that can be done. We can talk about that if you want to, but the end point, the goal is developers who can be effective without gatekeepers, whether that's DevOps or QA testers or compliance or whatever sorts of gatekeepers might be between the developer and production. Streamline that so that developers can get value in front of customers as quickly as possible. So
an engineer or a listener, somebody in our audience right now watching this exact segment, what is a litmus test for them to figure out that, oh, I need Jonathan's help?
How long does it take you to get a change into production? Is it more than an hour?
And what am I measuring? That the feature is committed, deployed, that the artifact went out and it got downloaded if it's a mobile app? Where is the measurement gap? Are we using DORA metrics?
We can use DORA metrics. That's maybe even more sophisticated than we need for just
because that's lead time, right?
Test. That's one of them. Yeah. What I would ask though is, like, your developer has finished a feature. How long does it take for the customer to benefit from that feature? If your answer is more than a day, come talk to me. If it's more than 2 hours, you're doing better than most companies, but there's still probably room for improvement. If you have it down to 20 minutes or less, I probably can't help you.
It sounds like the scenario that you're sort of conflating as the evil side is the one that I've sort of known as well in the engineering. So it seems to be systemic, or at least unintentionally. There seems to be a baseline to where companies go if they don't do this consciously, right? So that baseline being, oh, we have one feature and it takes X amount of effort to deploy, compared to how much effort went into the feature, the deployment is itself also almost feature sized. So we will put together many features at the same time so that one thing we do to deploy then relatively reduces in size at the cost of getting feedback later.
Right.
But we can parallelize, 10 developers to work on 10 features at the same time and pretend it's agile.
Right.
What you're saying is that investment of deploying more often should be at first embraced. So it'll get worse before it gets better, and then automate that so that you can do it. Let's say, what's the right word? So that 10 developers can deploy whenever they want, at the same time in parallel without, causing a ruckus, rather than, that handoff of octopus merge branching and
the talk that kicked off the whole DevOps movement, it's on YouTube. It's called 10 plus deploys a day. And I remember when I first heard about that talk, I think it was in 2009 that the talk came out. It's a great talk. Watch it if you haven't.
That's extreme. Yeah. Even today, 10 plus.
When I first heard about that, I was like, that's insane. There's no possible way I could do 10 deploys a day. I'm really glad that the conversation as an industry has moved from that point of that's
Mhm.
impossible, you're crazy, to okay, yeah, that's possible, I just can't do it here. I mean, that's a better place. I'm trying to get us one step further to okay, how can we do it here?
Hmm.
Because I honestly believe most companies can do it. I mean, there are a few exceptions. If you're deploying software to a Mars rover, you probably don't want to do that. You could deploy to a mock Mars rover sitting in the garage 10 times a day, but probably not the real one. But it's easier than most people think. It's also easier on smaller teams than it is on larger teams.
So for that, there seems to be that this is completely unintentional, that people just think that deploying has to be slow and painful and we'll do it as little as possible with as many features as possible. That seems to be a very organic, natural decision to make. What is some advice that you picked up early on in your career, or that you see other people pick up, that they follow to the letter, but it's actually really bad advice?
They follow to the letter. I don't know if I've heard this as advice, but it certainly seems to be the attitude that I see all over the place. And I used to adhere to it. And that is be as thorough in your testing as possible. And the problem with this is that we'll never thoroughly test everything. I mean, unless your software is hello world and nothing else, you can't test every possible code path. As soon as you add concurrency or multiple threads or an operating system with multitasking capabilities to the mix, there's infinite possible ways your code might be used. You can't test everything. So trying is kind of a losing game.
When you say the word test, what is the context for the usage of that word? Because to give it some weight, testing in the way that you just described, I think it was coined in the 1970s or 60s, where it was conflated with an analytical proof that the code works. That was a test. And I think a lot of junior engineers that come into unit testing and even TDD, they see tests as this is a factual proof that my code works. And it's not how, let's say, mature engineers use testing as a way of quality assurance. So where is the line? Like, this is obviously a huge spectrum.
Yeah.
What is testing when you say like we don't need to test or thoroughly test? What does thoroughly test in this context mean?
So what I mean specifically in that statement is it is literally impossible to execute the code, either execute it or analyze it sufficiently to be certain that it will never fail. That's impossible. Now, what I mean by test, it depends on context. I don't mean specifically or uniquely unit testing, automated unit testing. I mean, anything you could do to validate code, whether that is unit testing or end-to-end testing or having 100 monkeys run it through something, whatever. I don't care. There's nothing you can do literally to ensure that code will not fail. There's nothing that can be done to ensure that. You can get maybe to a certain number of 99.999, certain percentage, but each percentage point is 10 times more expensive than the last one. So we need a different approach, and that's the point I'm making. But back to your question of testing. I look at testing broadly. I mean, I'm a advocate for TDD, but I don't believe that it's sufficient. That's one common misconception among, I don't know if TDD practitioners say that or just the people who don't like TDD say that TDD practitioners say that, but it's not true. TDD is not sufficient. That's good, but it's not sufficient. I think that quality QA engineers can be a very valuable asset on a team, but they should be doing things that computers can't do. If you just have them reading a script and clicking through the same rote thing over and over again, script that and let your QA's brain do something useful that computers can't do. So we misuse QA testers in that sense a lot in this industry, which is very sad. We have highly skilled people doing work that literally trained monkeys could be doing. I mean, we train our computers to do that. Stop wasting your money and people's brain powers on that stuff, guys.
A lot of my clients are software developer in test, I believe is the FANG acronym and sort of QA engineer or QA automations engineer that are sort of bored at work. They're being paid big bucks to make sure that nothing bad gets deployed on Amazon or Netflix, but then they don't do anything creative. They don't actually contribute to the engineering side of the product. They just clean up the gunk that's around the sort of deployment artifact.
Yeah.
Or just give feedback. They don't even get to fix it. They just get to say, oh, it's red. Oh, sorry.
Right.
Back to hand back. Oops.
Exactly.
See you in 2 months.
Yeah.
Jonathan, regarding testing as a concept, I think it came from this idea that, well, if I deploy it to my customer and it's not working, I won't have a fix out for at least a few days.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to make sure that what I do send out, that it's sufficiently good so that if there's a problem, I don't have to respond to it over the weekend. I think a lot of small companies have that culture.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say that's a process, because that's very malleable, but perhaps that assumption that, okay, that's the minimum good side of the quality assurance aspect. That seems to be like a downstream problem of unintuitively, I might have to say, a downstream problem of not deploying often enough.
Right.
So what's the chicken and what's the egg? Where do we start fixing this problem?
So a lot of the practices that have become normal in software development are self-reinforcing. The longer it takes.
Oh, that's a very good point. So I'm sorry for interrupting you, but
Yeah.
could you repeat that?
Yeah. A lot of the I don't remember exactly what I said. I'll have to replay it later and see. But I think I said a lot of the practices that have sort of become habitual in software development are self-reinforcing.
Self-reinforcing.
And
so the bad stuff.
Yes.
It creates more bad stuff.
Right.
And the need to continue this culture of,
yes.
It creates justification for doing what we do badly because the less sprint.
Exactly. The good news is that the good practices are also self-reinforcing, but you have to make that jump somewhere. You have to start the process towards the good practices.
That sounds like where you come in.
Yeah, hopefully.
And that jump is painful. So it's not trivial.
No. I mean, of course, I do my best to make it easier than maybe otherwise would be, but it's not easy.
So how does the difficulty manifest? Is it money? Is it time? Is it stress? Is it upskilling?
If I had to
firing somebody, like what's the
the difficulty in change, overcoming fear. I think fear is the biggest obstacle to improvement in these areas, which goes back to what you were just saying about sort of our expectations and how we get there, the chicken and the egg. So let's look at testing again as an example. If our concern is that I will not be able to get I won't be able to get a bug fix in place if we discover a problem in production. If it takes a week to get that in production, then I want to be pretty confident that this thing going out is solid. So I'm going to spend a week doing QA on it to make sure that whatever that means, make sure that we have the tests done. Well, meanwhile, so now it takes a week of QA, whatever that, however we define that in an organization, takes a week.
Testing investment. I like to call it testing investment. It's it's going to be this good because we invested a week.
Right.
It's a perception, but it's still a fallacy that we can see on the budget sheet, if nothing else.
Sure, but and there's a good chance that if you do QA for a week, you'll find some bugs and fix them. I mean, that probably will happen. So maybe the quality does go up as a result of that. I'm not going to say absolutely it doesn't. So now we have a week lead time of QA. What that means is that for every change, now it takes a week to get it to production. So I'm not gonna just send small changes and then wait a week. I'm gonna get all of my changes ready. So now I have a week's worth of changes batched together that go into QA. Now a QA is harder.
Yeah, it takes longer and it's more complicated.
So now maybe it takes 2 weeks because
it has more artifacts to coordinate and orchestrate in order to set up a staging environment where it's realistic to
Yeah.
encompass all of those changes.
So either our testing now takes 2 weeks instead of 1, or it's not done as thoroughly. One of the two. So this is where you start to see these negative patterns reinforcing themselves. With QA takes too long, so we batch more things, which makes QA take longer, which makes us batch more things, which makes QA take even longer, and so on and so forth.
I think a lot of our listeners are getting a aha moment right now. Wait, I'm doing it at my company. What do you mean it's not normal?
Well, it might be normal. That doesn't mean it's good, right? A lot of things are normal that maybe we can still improve on.
So stopping that is painful.
It is.
It's like workout to stop doing that. It's like a diet.
Yeah.
So how does that weaning off period start?
Well, there's different ways. And of course, I'll talk about one of my approaches.
Okay, so diagnosis, yes, this is a problem.
Yeah.
Hire Jonathan.
Right.
What's step one?
Right. So step one, what I advocate. So there's 2 ways to approach this. One, if you have the appetite for it, if you're the boss, if you're the CEO of the company and you can do this, get those QA people out of your software delivery cycle. Stop making them do rote testing, regression testing, and make that the responsibility of your developers. That's the quickest, easiest thing you can do in this scenario. Instead, have those, don't fire them. They're still valuable, intelligent people. Have them work on doing testing in production, not to find bugs, but to find ways to improve the user experience. Let them do exploratory testing. Let them find ways, let them put on the hat of a customer and click around and go, oh wait, this doesn't make sense. This button should be over there. Those sorts of things. Let them do actual things that improve the quality of the product, not bug detection. That's the first, if you have the appetite. Most companies don't have the appetite for that, or at least the ones that work with me. So what I do, the approach I take is to automate your deployments. Before I give my approach, let me explain the approach that most companies try and fail at least in my experience. The idea here is, okay, so we know that we want to get to a place where the developer can hit merge and then it's deployed into production in 5 minutes. How do we do that? Well, we need a bunch of automated tests. So we need to have our developers write tests for everything. Right now we have 3% test coverage. So let's block out 6 months of time to just write tests and nothing else. And so you can get up to at least 95%, 100 would be better, but maybe 95 is reasonable. Oh, wait, we can't do that because we have customer features we have to build. So, well, how about every Friday we write some tests and then eventually we'll get there. Friday comes around. Oh, actually half the team's on holiday this week. Well, okay, the 5 of you who are here, you can still write tests. Long story short, you never get your tests written. I mean, I've never seen a team come from 0 to 10% coverage to 80% without just blocking out time. And the truth is, even if you do that, those tests are really low quality tests.
Yeah.
So that's a bad approach. Even when it works, or even if you theoretically solve this problem of tests, then you have the judgment day when we're switching from manual QA to finally automated deployments, and everybody's nervous and everybody turns on their cell phones and waits for everything to crash. It's a high stress, big bang switch. So I don't like that approach. I've never seen it work. So the approach I'd like to take instead is let your existing QA process happen with your manual regression testing if you need to, whatever you're doing. The key is to automate your deployments. Start there. So instead of starting at the beginning of the process with writing tests and so on, start at the end of the process with deploying automated deployments. Get that working. And that doesn't
what does automated deployment mean?
Great question. The first step is make sure that your product can be built with a script and deployed. Now, it depends on what kind of product you're building. Mobile apps are different than software as a service or whatever. But the end goal of this stage is from the time the developer hits merge into the master branch until it's in front of a customer, no humans involved.
Okay, a natural problem I can see immediately is that, because the master deployment is now deploying automatically, we will put QA onto the merge side of things, and then the developers avoid merging things into master or trunk or whatever it is. So that seems to be an immediate pain relief if they don't have Jonathan.
Right.
And perhaps a lot of teams are doing that. We will do QA when as a gatekeeping to merge into master, and then the DevOps engineer hits the button, and then that's automatic, and then the cubes and then the service mesh gets updated, and so it's not obvious to me that in itself it doesn't close all of the doors, which would lead back down to the negative reinforcement loop.
It doesn't. You're right. It's the first step. Now, and you brought up the very most obvious problem there is, okay, so that implies that your QA is happening before merge. How do you do that? I mean, if you have 10 developers or God forbid 1,000 developers, all depending on the QA department, how do you do that testing?
I've seen that where they test every merge, every branch before merging, and then that's how they create deployment artifacts, and then they test that again. And that just takes 3 months to deploy anything sensible.
So this is the first step. The first step is automate your deployments, so that automate your deployments so that from merge to deployment. And let me clarify that a little bit. Deployment doesn't necessarily have to be in front of customers, although that's ideal. In some cases, like if you're building a mobile app, you don't want to deploy 50 times a day.
To store,
So you still are going to batch that. The key is that there shouldn't be a human gatekeeper between merge and deployment. You might have some batching still for the sake of the mobile store or uploading to Mars if you're building Mars rovers. But there shouldn't be a human decision to be made other than a business decision of this is the right time. We deploy on Tuesdays or something like that.
So does automation imply no human involved?
In this context, yes, I would say so.
So the last human input, the last human signal was getting the commits onto a particular branch. That is step 0. Okay. And then how would you go about adding a human to this process? So now we're in the realm of regulation, security, SecOps, provisioning.
Whenever possible, do that before merge.
Before see, because that's then it's very easy to conflate with but we also do all the other things that you just said not to do before merge, to put all those humans back in control.
So I don't have a problem with humans making a decision before the merge button. I mean, that's what happens anyway. I mean, the developer is making a decision. Is this code ready or not? So my first step is get all the human decision making and effort before the merge button. Write your documentation before merge. Write your release notes before merge. Do QA sign off. Do any governmental regulational sign off. Do all that stuff if possible before merge. Now, maybe there's cases where that's literally not possible. Maybe the government requires that they do a particular test, manual test on a production artifact before.
It sounds like that's where you start diverging from the advice Dave Farley gives in continuous delivery. What was the book called? Continuous deployment? Continuous delivery. Delivery. Where, because he said, okay, well, when you commit, first of all, get on trunk-based development, and then get the artifacts done. And there should be no human involved in the artifacts. And the humans should be interacting with the post-merge artifacts. So with the deployment artifacts, with the binaries, with some kind of environment that got refreshed. And that's where regulation should happen. You're saying it should happen before, like getting onto master, getting onto trunk.
Those can be reconciled in some cases, at least. I mean, you could have your branch. So to make that happen, literally, you need to implement a policy on your Git repository that you only fast forward on master, basically. And if you do that, then you can build an artifact on a branch that you will be the same once it's merged.
So that the code base does not get accidentally corrupted by a forced commit somewhere appearing, or a merge artifact. Or a merge artifact that might even happen automatically, because of how the pull request was handled.
Right. So you can reconcile those. It's not always easy or even desirable necessarily. The key I want to drive home, though, is that what I'm advocating here is a starting point, not the end point. I'm not saying automate your deployments and you're done. I'm saying this is how you start on the process towards what Dave Farley is advocating for. So
perhaps this is something you highlighted that I have written down to double check with you. When you said there's two ways, there's a ballsy way of like just stop doing QA before as a gatekeeping, and then there's the slow way, which is at least automate your, but the question that arose is in my mind was, who needs to contact you? If step 0 is contact Jonathan, which title in the company needs to reach out to Jonathan? Is it a dev? Is it an IC? Is it a tester? Is it a manager? Is it the CTO, the CEO? Like where is it budgeted? Where is the boundary? Who talks to Jonathan?
Probably, yeah, that's a great question. If you're an agile coach or a scrum master or an engineering manager, those are the people who probably have the authority to implement the changes I'm advocating. If you're not, I'm in contact with QA engineers who are frustrated by how inefficient QA is, and they're asking my advice, and I'm happy to help.
And they
I can't necessarily, they don't necessarily have the power to implement these changes, but I can still offer the best advice I can for how to respond to their situation. So, but yes, if you want to implement this stuff at your company, you'll have the best chance of success if the engineering manager is on board.
So the nitty-gritty sort of on the ground work happens in the engineering department.
Yes.
That's the tech side of DevOps.
Yeah.
What's the impact on the biz or the product side of the company when DevOps is done well?
When it's done well, the impact is that they get faster customer feedback and they have fewer defects in production.
So that's what if they don't need feedback? Well, what if they just don't have the company culture of asking for feedback? What if feedback is just
a lot of companies don't have the culture of asking for feedback.
Yes.
Shame on them. I don't know. That's unfortunate.
But they exist.
Improve that. They definitely exist. I mean, I've worked in many of them.
And starting to ask for feedback might be a stepping stone to them improving their business with your help, with DevOps.
So the thing I would focus on there, so let's imagine somebody's coming to me, Jonathan, I feel like we're doing things badly, but nobody here wants to hear feedback. What do we do? I would ask that person, what do the people at your company, what pain are they experiencing? What do they want to be different? And let's focus on those things. I mean, maybe they have 1,000 problems that I can help with, but if they don't want to solve those problems, either because they just are ignoring them, or maybe there's something else that's more urgent for them, solve the problem that's causing them pain. And maybe that's not DevOps. And if that's the case, great. I'm not the right person for that, but hopefully you'll get help somewhere. If you don't get help from me, please get help somewhere, but yeah, find the pain that people are experiencing and work on solving that. Usually it's not a lot of connections between some sort of agility or DevOps related solution, but don't start with the solution, start with the problem.
So this might sound a bit off topic. I'm sorry, listeners, viewers, but it will all make sense, I promise. In your notes, you mentioned you dance salsa.
Yeah.
I also dance salsa and kizomba, and sort of a mix of Latin and African dances. With that kind of dance, there's always a lead and a follower in let's say and the lead, with regards to music, at least in my experience, the leader always listens to the pulse, to the one in the music, not necessarily the tonality or the color of the music, but to the pulse, to the rhythm of the music. The lead listens to the one. If the follower listens to the one, you will actually bump into each other because you need to be lockstep. The follower needs to be slightly behind.
Yeah.
Right. So it's very important that the follower, which is usually the lady, the feminine partner in the dance, he, they, or she is usually listening to the color, to the tonality, to the emotional side of the music, not so much the one, to the pulse. They listen to the lead for the pulse. A lot of people that I speak to think of DevOps as a supportive, as a follower sort of activity. But the way you're describing it, it sounds like it's a very much lead activity, that it is the governing thing that gives the pulse. You mentioned in your daily commits that, if nothing else, do a zero change deploy, automate that. How long does it take to to just repeat the same artifact into production. And that seems to be very pulse oriented, not so much music, not so much emotion. So in order to get that into the company, it seems like DevOps is fundamental. At least that pulse of deploying regularly, it seems to be fundamental, even beyond product, business analysis, and everything else. How hard is it to get that to such a low level, bare metal, I would say, in a company that doesn't have that practice?
I have done it successfully in as little as 2 weeks. Now, let me be clear. Not everybody in the company necessarily sees it as a success that quickly. You have to build a track record of success before everybody's like, "Yay, thanks for doing that." But I have gone from multiple weeks long development QA cycles to okay, we're switching to trunk-based development and automated deployments next week. I have done that in 2 weeks,
and that's painful. Yeah,
it is painful.
I've seen teams where we hire somebody and they're on Git flow, hire somebody else, they're on trunk based, hire somebody else, they're sort of doing this sort of ninja octopus thing where they have like their own branch, but it's two developers on their branch, but it's not really a feature branch, front and back end, and maybe it's the same feature branch, but they create two separate artifacts. With the Pulse thing, it seems that if this is a lead process, that it will conflict in some way with pre-existing management or sort of agile, Scrum, organizational processes, right? So if there's a sprint which is 2 weeks long, a lot of people immediately conflate, okay, we stop the previous sprint by deploying something, and then there's a retrospective, and then we start a sprint, and then we finish the sprint by deploying something. This seems to be a natural disconnect and conflict in the pulse of that we spoke about earlier of DevOps itself. What is a reasonable way for somebody who is stuck doing Scrum and Agile, perhaps dark Agile, perhaps doing it badly, and then tell them, okay, this is our sprint, that's our sprint goal, and we'll be doing 100 deployments during this sprint. How do you navigate that?
So I mean, there's absolutely nothing in the Scrum guide that says you only deploy every 2 weeks.
I know, I'm aware of that.
Right?
I'm aware of that, but it's this conflation. I'm speaking of Agile done badly, conflation of the sprint goal. The sprint goal, the outcome is that deployment of the things we did in the sprint time, in the interval.
If that's the way the team is seeing Scrum, they're gonna have to change their understanding of Scrum. I mean, you can still have your sprint goal. Ideally, the goal isn't a list of stories; it's a deliverable. It's a delivery.
It's a value. It's a change in how it's a change in how the customer uses or perceives value. Right. So
but you can still deliver that one piece at a time, 10 times a day. You can or whatever that it turns out to be.
And use feature flags, and then perhaps have them shift.
You can use feature flags, and honestly, feature flags get all the attention. You don't need them nearly as often as they've talked about. It's really easy to just deploy a partial feature, that nobody uses. You only need feature flags if you need something to literally be unseeable in most cases,
or if it replaces something that's seeable.
And by the way, just let me throw this out there. If you're at the situation where you're like, oh gosh, my gosh, we need feature flags, but I don't know which library to use, there's a really cheap way to do a feature flag. It's called if false. Just put that in your code. Put your new code behind the if false, and it will never be executed. And then when you're done, you comment out or delete that if false. That's your poor man's feature flag.
But Jonathan, when I uncomment it, I need to wait for it to go through QA for 2 weeks. That one change.
Call me. I'll work on that.
Call Jonathan right now. So, but to your prior point, it does sound like if the pre-existing condition, if the pre-existing culture in the company is we're doing Agile badly and we're doing 2 week sprints and we're deploying once a week, that is not a good fit to call Jonathan.
Well,
or will you be doing?
Most people will be doing that. I mean, that often is where I come in and start helping. So I wouldn't say that that's a bad fit. What's a bad fit is we like it that way.
Okay. So it's dogmatic.
Yeah, I mean, if you're content with 2-week deployment cycles and you think that's good or something, and you don't feel pain about it, then I can't help you. I can't help a patient who doesn't want to improve.
Are you aware of the book? Sorry, I will now misquote the book. I'm sorry, because I'm not aware of it apparently. Team Topologies.
Yes, great book.
So if you're on the team topology side of a enabler, that's what would. So if a feature flag has to be coordinated between two streamlined teams, that is what I would call an enabler team. In most companies that do follow that sounds like the QA side or the testing side or the governance side is the enabler that sort of synchronizes several streamlined teams. So the context now is a company that has 3, 4, 5 parallel teams pushing features out. Is that too large for the context of our conversation, or when Jonathan comes in? Or like, how do you do a context where you have 20 engineers, that's 3 teams of 5 plus managers, and you have 3 lockstep parallel feature plans, roadmaps, let's say, streamlined teams in that manner? Does every one of them deploy separately? Are we using micro front ends? Is one of them strictly backend, strictly Android, strictly iPhone? Or what is a natural, reverse Conway maneuver to get to a healthy DevOps state from a team that does stuff in parallel, but in lockstep?
So explain what you mean by lockstep. I mean, are you talking that the front end and back end have to be released together?
Well, if there's an Android or some kind of front-end artifact that is seen on a particular download page in the App Store or in a particular domain, that in itself cannot be feature flag if it has to be coordinated, right, across multiple teams.
Okay.
Right. So if I feature flag my feature, it doesn't make sense if you also don't feature flag your new version of your product, right? So we get into this sort of microservices, micro front ends, sort of eventual consistency and sort of the version, the dependency management between teams.
So I think that's a great example where a proper feature flag system makes sense. A feature flag SaaS, for example.
It's like an enterprise grade feature flag.
Exactly. So I mean, and they don't have to be expensive. I mean, I was looking at, I think it was split.io the other day, and for up to 10 developers, I think it's free. So, and I'm sure that all their competitors have similar pricing points for small teams. So you can at least try it out, and I encourage that. But yeah, if you have this thing, you're building a feature that needs to go out on the web version, the iOS version, and the Android version simultaneously, but those are 3 teams, definitely a feature flag is a perfect way to do that. That way, what you don't want is the iOS team waiting for the Android team to be done before they hit merge. Or worse, they've hit merge, but they're waiting for the Android team before they actually do the manual deployment process. So you want to decouple those teams.
The manual deployment process.
That would be worse. Yeah. So it should still be automated. Now, what I mean by that, let me elaborate for a mobile app.
I think you mentioned something really important, but it didn't land for me.
Yeah. So I mean, let's imagine that you have web, iOS, and Android for whatever you're building. You're building a fitness app or something, right? And you've added the new weight tracker. But it's not ready yet. iOS is done. Android and web aren't done yet. So
okay, that's a good example.
Build a feature flag to hide the weight manager until you're ready. So you can push the new asset to the iOS store. It's maybe sitting there for a week, and then finally the Android version's ready. Now they're both uploaded, and then the web version comes. So over the course of 3 weeks, each team finishes their thing. Now you flip that switch.
That's a great example. I love that.
That's perfect. Now what I meant.
And in the meantime, there's also a backend or platforms team that's sort of synchronizing and sort of versioned and is ready to receive both versions.
Yeah. Now, what I meant by manual deployment there was, maybe somebody's actually uploading the artifact manually to the Apple Store or something. Hopefully not. Hopefully you've automated that process.
You'd be surprised by how many people do that.
I probably wouldn't be surprised. Disappointed, perhaps, but not surprised.
It's the devil,
Yes.
So the detour, and that's a great example. And I would like to sort of make a detour now from corporate to up and coming young engineers. DevOps inherently is a collaborative process. You know, you even said it's synonymous with collaboration. Post-COVID, remote work, boot camps, self-taught developers, you know, in the late teens, 20s, they are learning coding through boot camps, lead code, etc., doing interviews. How does somebody who works solo from home remotely learn or prepare? How does one get DevOps experience solo?
Right. This relates closely to the topic we talked about at the beginning. You know, when you're growing, can you do DevOps before that wall exists? If you're talking about DevOps as a set of skills or tools, you know, a lot of people think of Docker and Kubernetes and Terraform and these sorts of things as sort of DevOpsy things. If that's the sense you're talking about it, just practice those tools. You know, it's very inexpensive to play with Kubernetes on Google Cloud or AWS or Azure. If you really want to nerd out, you can go buy a couple used PCs on eBay or set some Raspberry Pis up in your basement or whatever, and, you know, build a Kubernetes cluster that way. You don't have to. Just start nerding out on these things. If that's what you mean by DevOps, definitely learn that stuff, and you will be highly employable very quickly because those skills are in high demand. And somebody with 3 months of at-home Kubernetes experience, or whatever your tool of choice is, Terraform or Ansible, that's great. I mean, people like to hire people like that. If you have the initiative to do that at home on your spare time, that shines on a CV. I mean, so it might be a little bit hard sometimes to get past that screening call. You know, how long have you been using Kubernetes in production? Oh, well, I haven't. I just played with it at home. But as long as you can get past the screening call, hiring managers love people with that sort of enthusiasm.
Yeah.
If you're talking about collaboration, you know, the more true sense, in my opinion, of what DevOps means, learn how to automate your deployments. Read Dave Farley's book, Continuous Delivery. Continuous delivery and DevOps are almost synonymous in a lot of ways, at least in a technical sense, because
that's very unintuitive. You know, to a lot of listeners, to a lot of YouTube videos and books that are out there, it's very unintuitive that CI/CD is synonymous with DevOps rather than a implementation detail of it.
Right. Dave Farley has said, I've heard him interviewed a couple months ago, where he said that he prefers the term continuous delivery, and he made really compelling arguments, actually, because there's less room.
Sorry, Jonathan, continuous delivery compared to what?
Compared to DevOps,
Compared to DevOps. What about continuous deployment rather than delivery? Is there a conflation of terms there?
There's an often conflation, but they're different. And let me just address that quickly. So continuous delivery, which is the title of his book, is the practice of automatically building deployable artifacts for every code change
that are valuable to someone.
Hopefully, yeah.
So, and are you continuously delivering value, or are you continuously delivering the artifacts? What is being delivered?
Yeah, that's a good question. As the term is defined, at least as I understand it, it's I don't think it defines who they're delivered to, but other than like an artifact repository.
yeah. Because that's where it stops. Like his video, the loop, the logo, the circle, it stops with the artifact repository usually.
Yeah.
Or there's some blurry line and then maybe some user at the end off screen.
But that's how continuous delivery is defined: is you have a deployable artifact, whether it's a zip file, a Docker image, an Android APK file, whatever. You have a deployable artifact. As far as you know, that artifact could be deployed. It has passed all quality measures and so on. There's no reason it could not be deployed. From then on, it's either a technical or business decision when to deploy, and that's the difference between continuous delivery, continuous deployment. Continuous deployment goes one step farther and deploys into production as soon as the artifact is ready. So there, we already talked about a couple instances where continuous deployment is not possible or not desirable. Mobile apps, it's not desirable. You don't want your users using all their bandwidth downloading 1,000 updates a day. You want to batch that to once a week or once, maybe once a week unless there's a critical
because you also cannot deploy deltas, right? You need to re-download the entire application.
Right. There are technical cases where it's not possible if you're deploying to satellites or to the Mars rover or to a Tesla, a self-driving Tesla. You don't want to send a deployment while the person's driving down the highway. You want to do it at a certain time, when the car is not in use or whatever. So there are cases, business and technical cases, where continuous deployment is impossible or unwise, and that's fine. But I strongly believe that every team should aim for continuous delivery at least. And even in those cases, probably they should deploy to some sort of test environment automatically. If you're building an Android app, you could deploy to a beta program that your employees only can download when they want to, for example.
Jonathan, that sounds like CI. So 10, 15 years ago, when somebody, I don't know whether it was Jenkins or Circle CI, but maybe those are too young. But back then, I was told CI was about, when you have a commit, run the tests and automate that. Yeah. And that seems to be going the wrong direction with both continuous deployment and continuous delivery. It's just doing some kind of artifact work, and it's just giving a feedback loop to the developer. But it has no artifact to speak of.
There's no artifact per se from continuous integration. However, both continuous. So if we work backwards, continuous deployment requires continuous delivery. That's one step farther. Continuous delivery requires continuous integration. So continuous integration, as you said, is so if we look at the word, the definition, it's about integrating continuously. The tests, which usually get the attention, are actually an enabler. They aren't the core feature.
What is the core feature? Because you said, separate out testing and QA from CI. What is CI if I don't do testing in CI?
So the defining feature of continuous integration is, are you integrating continuously? And of course, that sounds obvious, but let's break that down to what that actually means. Integration means that your features work with everybody else's features. At the most superficial level, that means there's no Git conflict when you merge. It's more than that, though.
But is the integration being done? Is the integration being checked for and tested pre-merge or post-merge?
There are two schools on that. There are two ways to do that. Of course, the Git merge has to be resolved before merge or simultaneously with the merge, right? You can't merge and then, I need to go. I guess I've seen that before. You merge and then you go fix the
and that case merge. I've seen that case more often than the one you're about to talk about.
Right.
Because I see a lot of people, we have 5 branches and I need to check every one of them. Okay, so we'll have a Jenkins, worker for every team. For every team will have their own pre-merge sort of checks, and then we will merge again. Then we have another QA process on top of that. I've seen that. It's terrible. But somebody somewhere read a book, and that is the natural conclusion they came to that, okay, we need that.
Right. So ideally, the easy way, the correct way to do continuous integration is to have a single branch. Usually it's called master or main or trunk or whatever, single branch, and all developers merge into that regularly, at least once per day.
Instead of what?
Instead of having a feature branch that lasts for days or weeks.
So if I use Git, my checkout, my repository is already a feature branch, right? So me having it on my local machine is already a deviation, a divergence from the origin version of master. So Git, I don't think that is possible by itself, due to collaborative eventual consistency problems of, master on your laptop is different than master on my laptop. Right. And those merges have to happen on my machine before I can push.
You need to merge to the authoritative master.
To the authoritative master.
At least once per day. Yeah, just your local master is not good enough.
Exactly.
Is right. As you said, that's not really master. That's your copy of an old version of the real master.
Yes. And then if people are doing like merges and rebases and everything, that's a big no-no.
Well,
so it seems, so in order to do this kind of stuff, you need to really, really limit yourself to how you're using Git. Is that a correct way of?
I mean, if you do it this way, you don't need to know 98% of what Git does. I mean, you'll almost never have a merge conflict to resolve, almost never. And when you do, it's going to be super small and easy to fix. You don't need to know much about rebasing. I still do rebasing every now and then, but it's usually pretty trivial stuff.
It's practical,
you certainly don't have to do all this weird spaghetti nonsense.
I see that a lot. I see
Yeah.
that a lot, unfortunately.
And honestly, that's the biggest pain most developers feel about Git.
It's like, oh, I've merged this already.
Yeah.
Why is it new again?
Yeah.
Like,
Oh,
why is I've merged this. Why is the
why are
alt
your
change
changes
new?
in my pull request?
No, why are your alt changes, which I've removed, coming up as new in my pull request?
Yeah, exactly.
Because somebody rebased without knowledge, and then it tagged the.
Yeah.
Okay. But that's very complicated. And that's not, you need a PhD to figure that shit out.
Pretty much.
Okay, that's an octopus merge, and now somebody tagged that file, and the old line that you've replaced became newer than your commit because you rebased. So you hijacked the old timestamp, right? So it's very complicated.
Yeah.
What is the sort of best practice for somebody starting off now? Just really tactical, gritty Git advice. What to do, what not to do.
Best advice for someone starting out: make your pull requests and your commits as small as possible. The smaller your pull request, the easier it is for someone to review and merge quickly. The less chance you have for merge conflicts.
What about?
It's a team effort. It's if you're the only one on your team doing that, you're going to be very frustrated.
What about derivative artifacts? So maybe you're the front end guy, you're using React or Flutter, and then there's a backend guy, and then we're collaborating through some kind of, let's say, GraphQL, and the GraphQL has backend artifacts and front end artifacts. So maybe that's some typing system, maybe it's some header files, maybe it's some, I don't know what Go uses. Maybe it's some, compiled binaries that you sort of at least need to have in order to, for type safety. So there's a sort of handoff in each direction that needs to happen in lockstep. Or maybe it's one directional from backend to front end. How do you best manage that? Even if it's just something trivial like updating node modules on like a JavaScript TypeScript project of, oh, I've changed something. Yeah, I've changed something as well. So when we merge together, there will be a conflict, and we both need to resolve that after the merge. How do you sort of, that Agile seems to purport that, minimize or remove handoffs and handbacks. But with any kind of conflict resolution, there is an immediate handoff and handback of like, hey, guys, I had a conflict. Everybody sync up right now. The more teams are using trunk-based development, the more this kind of stuff will happen. How do you avoid this? Is there a natural way of avoiding this, or is it just the devil,
Yeah, I don't think there is a way to avoid that entirely. I mean, even if everybody is committing every 5 minutes to master, eventually 2 people are going to update different node modules in the same package. At the same 5-minute interval, right? And there's gonna be a conflict.
And maybe it's even the same package, but one of them said, "Oh, we're gonna use 5151," and the other guy said, "Oh, we're gonna use 15 asterisk." So it ends up being the same thing right now, but it's a different derivative configuration option.
Right. So yeah, that's a great example. That will happen eventually. Of course, the smaller your window, the smaller your commits, the less often it happens, because the chances of 2 people updating that same module in the same 5-minute interval are smaller than in the same 24-hour interval or the same 3-week interval.
Or a 1-week-long feature branch.
Exactly. So the shorter your branch, the less that happens, but you can't avoid it entirely. The only silver lining is if you do your changes quickly and small, it's painless to fix it, because the ideal scenario here is, I know I need version 5.1. Let me do an update to 5.1, commit that, and merge it. Oh, somebody else already did that. There's a conflict. Oh, they already got the one I need. I'll just delete my change and keep going. So there's really nothing to resolve if you do it in these super small increments. Now, if you do that and then you add 6 commits on top of it and you work for a week and then you discover it, then you have to do a resolution. Or let's use another example. You've updated foo module to 1.2, and I've updated bar module to 2.6, and they're like 2 lines apart. So they aren't actually a conflict, but Git doesn't know how to resolve it. Now I do have to resolve that. But again, if I do a small, quick change, my only change is I updated the version, or I added a module or whatever, then yes, whoever gets there last has to resolve that. But now it's a trivial thing to resolve. You don't have to spend hours scratching your head going, what did I mean here? Wait, why does this code look different than before? So the smaller you keep those changes, A, the fewer conflicts you have, and B, the ones you do have are easier to fix.
Does smaller changes mean more frequency? I hate when developers do 40 commits in a day, and it's like test, edit, oops, fixed, and it's like one line commit messages, and that seems to go against the grain and like against any kind of recommendation on how to structure commits. How do you handle that immediate problem of somebody just committing every time they hit enter?
So I don't mind if they commit every time they hit enter, as long as they merge every time they hit enter. And implicit in that is that they've run the CI tests. So
so at least the local side of test automation.
Yeah. And this touches on the two schools of test-driven development, which we can talk about in a moment. But as long as your test, as long as you're using tests, automated testing, probably TDD, but it doesn't have to be, and you've committed a change that doesn't break the tests, it should be safe to go into master. If you're using pair programming, doubly so. So as long as you follow those rules, whatever the rules are your team is set up for quality, whether it's you need to be code reviewed, you need to pass the test, etc. As long as those things pass, I don't really care how many commits you have. Now, it can be annoying if you have fixed typo, fixed typo, fixed typo.
Yes.
But ideally, unless those are just typos and comments, which don't matter so much, if they're typos in actual code, they're probably going to cause your tests to fail. So you're not actually going to be committing that.
Yeah.
But I don't mean committing. I mean, you're not going to be merging that into production.
So to steelman the other side of this argument, when is it good to have feature branches, even when you have automated delivery?
There are some times when long-lived feature. So let me answer that with two answers, actually. I still use feature branches, but they're very short-lived. And so maybe this is a good time to talk about the two approaches to test-driven development, or to not test-driven development, to trunk-based development. The sort of pure version of TBD, trunk-based development, is literally everything. You just hack on master and you push, and if there's a conflict, you pull and repush until everything merges happily.
That's a sort of dirty cowboy style of we just break it, like move fast and break things.
And built into that, usually on the teams that do this, is the assumption that you run all of your tests locally, so that you're confident that whatever you're pushing is not going to break anything. So that assumes that most or all of your tests can run locally, and that everybody's disciplined enough to do that.
And that requires a high degree of maturity, discipline, and experience across the team.
And then if ever you do break master, work stops. Everybody stops working on anything until it's fixed. Now, maybe that only takes 5 minutes and it's or whatever, but if it takes longer, it's a team effort. You fix that. So those are some of the assumptions built into the so-called pure trunk-based development. I tend to prefer a little bit more safety around my stuff, and call me paranoid or untrusting or whatever. Maybe that's true, but I like to use short-lived feature branches. I think Dave Farley, I think his most recent video talks about this, that as long as your feature branches live less than a day, you're kind of okay within the definition of trunk-based development. So I create 20 or 30 feature branches per day. Each one contains 1 or 2 commits. It's pretty short and self-contained. I push it up, get it reviewed, and merge it. So I'm on the team I'm working at Hubuk. I have probably the most daily merges and Slack notifications saying, Jonathan deployed this, Jonathan deployed this, Jonathan deployed this. So I probably have 5 of those for every one someone else has, just because I'm in this habit, and the rest of the team is learning the habit. So those are the two flavors: sort of strict trunk-based development, sort of cowboy style, directly on master, and then I guess you could call it loose trunk-based development. It still has feature branches. So that feeds into your question: when are feature branches a good idea? If you use them like this, I think they're fine. It's a good idea.
Okay.
There are times when long-lived feature branches, the last days or weeks, are necessary. It should be a last resort, and they're going to be very rare. Like, these are the sorts of things like we are replacing MySQL with Postgres, and you can't, and for some reason we can't do it piecemeal, because we need the relationships between all the tables to maintain.
The queries need to change, and everybody's working on something new.
Yeah. So in that situation, you probably need a long-lived branch, which requires a lot of care because there's a lot of room for things to break. You probably need to be refreshing that branch daily from master to make sure any changes are coming through and being resolved quickly. You don't want to have a 6-month project and then try to resolve your conflicts. Yeah.
So to that degree, there's a lot of version control finesse going into the tactical side of DevOps or trunk-based development or just doing any kind of continuous delivery? What's the flexibility here to disagree? So if I'm a, let's say, senior or VP of engineering joining a less mature company that does DevOps badly, if I just start doing trunk-based development, it will freak everybody out.
Yeah.
So that it seems it might not be obvious, but it seems like there needs to be some kind of quorum, some kind of agreement on how the team as a cohesive whole behaves. Because you can't just have one cowboy and then one guy having feature branches and then them collaborating. But well, I'll just merge the master and you sync from that, but then the other guy is using master as the sort of valid QA sort of artifacts. Like how do these inconsistencies, especially if it's like a growing company and it's a startup that went from 5 to 20, and then one team is just delivering a lot differently and a lot more into master or through master. How do you navigate that?
Carefully. How much room is there for disagreement? Yeah, you're right. The team or teams need to have a certain level of common understanding, working agreements.
Or let me ask you differently. Okay. You've probably seen this before. Like when somebody hired you, this was probably the case.
So
people, at least that the team disagreed on, we should do this, or we should do trunk based, or no, we can't do it because QA, or like how do you, who gets, who eats first?
If the team at least agrees that they want to do be agile, I should say, then they should be open to experimentation. So, and this is an approach that works for any change you want to implement. Let's go from 2-week sprints to 1 week, or let's stop doing the daily, or let's start doing our stand-ups in the coffee room, or whatever. If somebody's like, I don't think that's a good idea, say, could we try it as an experiment for 2 weeks?
Okay.
Can we try automated deployments for 2 weeks? If we're not happy with the result, we can turn off that automation and we can go back to manual deployments. Could we try pair programming for 2 weeks? If we don't like it, we can go back to individual silos. Whatever. I don't want to paint it in too negative a picture there, but whatever the thing is, try that. If the team really pushes back and they're not willing to try that, okay, then that's another conversation. But that also probably suggests that they're not maybe as agile as we were hoping for, or as that they might claim to be. That's the approach I usually take. I do get pushback. A few years ago, I was trying to implement automated deployments on a team. We spent an hour discussing it. I was the boss. I could have pulled rank and said, we're going to do this. I didn't want to. They decided to go with continuous delivery with manual deployments. They regretted it later, actually. I was told later that they wished that they had gone with the automated deployments. And my arguments, in retrospect, were convincing, but at the time were not. So did I make the right decision? Probably. By that, I mean letting them choose and not forcing it on them. Because had I forced it on them, I don't know what the outcome would have been, but it never feels good to have the boss just mandate something you disagree with.
Okay. How are you on time, Jonathan?
I can go a little longer.
Okay. Before we do a sort of sales pitch for your website, for your links, I wanted to approach one more question that we have in the notes. I'm just going to pull them up real quick. And it has to do with your blog.
Okay.
You said the daily commit, and I saw that every post you make has a Git hash.
Yes.
Are you posting on your blog through Git? Is this like the extreme of DevOps, of your continuously deploying your Git blog as well, or is that a pet peeve?
I am deploying through Git. That hash you see has nothing to do with Git. However, that's actually just the MD5 sum of the file that the MD file that blog post is created from.
Okay, so that's the slug of the post.
Essentially, yeah. But it was created to look like Git.
Okay. Fair.
I do write my blog on Git in Markdown. And it's published with the Hugo static site generator. So yes, I do use Git, although that's not actually why that SHA is there. That's me lying about using Git by using Git to do it.
Well, to perhaps to stay on this topic, If I start a project now, solo, I'm developing something. To what degree can I add continuous deployment or delivery to that? That's practical for one person.
You can absolutely do it, and that's the best time to do it. And it's easy when you're starting out. I have a blog post. It's a couple years old called "Dancing Skeletons,"
Dancing skeletons.
about this. It's really short, but the concept is, whenever I start a new project, I build a CI pipeline and a CD first. So I mean, I have
so that is step zero.
That is step zero.
That is step zero. And what tools do you use? What tools would you recommend for like Go, TypeScript, JavaScript? I think that's a popular stack, and then .NET, let's say.
Yeah, those are what I use and what I recommend are two different answers. What I use usually is GitLab.com. What I recommend is what you're most comfortable with. There's if you like GitHub, use it. If you like Azure, use it. If you like Jenkins and your own version of Subversion on your laptop, whatever, use that. Use what you're comfortable with.
And GitLab specifically, the GitLab automated automation pipeline.
Yeah, so GitLab is a lot like GitHub. I mean, it does source control with Git, and it has built-in CI/CD features.
Yeah,
I think that they're more mature than GitHub's, which is the main reason I still prefer them. GitHub Actions is much newer than GitLab CI.
I was referring to GitHub Actions, yes. So I didn't know what the GitLab equivalent is.
But I like GitLab better. It's a little more mature in some ways. In other ways, GitHub is more mature. It's really kind of half dozen of one, six of the other. Pick which one you like, or Azure if you're a Microsoft person. That's fine too. I've heard a lot more complaints about Azure, and I've only used it sparingly. But GitHub is Microsoft also. So if that's the poison you pick, then either one of those are good choices.
So on the topic of Azure, perhaps breach to dip our toes into a topic with the whole SaaS and FaaS and serverless architectures. How do you do deployments, even version control and continuous delivery for serverless functions, for edge functions, for Azure? I don't know what they're called, but they have a sort of serverless aspect to it.
That's a great question. I wish I had an answer. I haven't actually toyed with serverless yet.
I think that's our age showing.
Exactly.
Because that's very hip. I see a lot of low-code, no-code solutions where they seem to be developing in production, right? So it's just, it's not that I'm writing something on my machine and then I'm putting it in production, but it doesn't run on my machine. Right. On my machine, it can only be simulated in a black box. And then it can only exist and run and be version controlled on production. How do you navigate that with like a traditional?
It's one of the reasons I haven't done much with serverless yet. Although I like the principle, that aspect of it makes me a little bit nervous. Like I really like.
Okay, so I'm not the only one.
Oh. I know there are a lot of serverless advocates out there. I've had a couple on my own podcast to talk about this, and they assure me that yes, you can do enough. The simulation is close enough, but I really like the confidence I can get by testing something locally. On an airplane at 30,000 feet without a Wi-Fi connection, ideally. But yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I haven't used serverless enough or at all personally to really have a good answer to that one.
Okay. I think that's a good wrap for at least for the topic side.
Yeah.
Do you have a book? Do you have a website? Do you have a podcast? Do you have a blog?
Yes, I have a lot of things. If you're interested in reaching out, you can find me at jhall.io. That's my website where you can find my blog with the little Git hashes next to them, or the what look like Git hashes. I don't have a book out, but I do have an upcoming seminar I'm doing in October, the Lean CD seminar, which is going to walk you through the process I started to describe to you today of automating your deployments and then going from there to streamline your deployment process. So if you're stuck with 2-week QA cycles and you don't know how to get out of the trap, my Lean CD seminar is for you, leancdseminar.com. It's not very expensive. It's probably less expensive than you imagine. So go check it out. If you can't afford it, there is a free version on an email course, leancdbootcamp.com. Just gives you the highlights in a 10-day email course that you can look at.
And that's asynchronous and completely offline. There's no interaction.
The email course is asynchronous offline. The Lean CD seminar, the one you pay for, will be video recordings. Or actually, I'm going to do it live. So it'll be video live sessions that are recorded. So if you miss it, you can watch the recording. A Slack channel for discussion with the community. And we're going to try our darndest to get your CD working in 4 weeks or less.
Wow, that's
And
amazing.
if not, I'll give you your money back.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Anything else we should know about Jonathan? Anything else you do outside of tech? Do you have a band? Do you have a band? Do you have anything? Is there a way to sort of?
I'm about to be a second-time father. Coming up in the beginning of November, so we're quite excited about that. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. If you're ever in Amsterdam, look me up. I live near Amsterdam. I'll be happy to meet for a coffee or a beer. Was even better.
Is there any meetups that you would recommend going to this year?
The meetup, I'm one of the co-organizers for the Go meetup in Amsterdam, so I go there most of the time. There's a lot of good meetups in Amsterdam. There's a serverless meetup I haven't been to yet. I probably should go now that we've been talking about that. Yeah, there's
you've been to Vienna recently.
Yeah, I was recently at Vienna. I spoke last week at the Vienna, or the Agile Tour Vienna. I spoke about the same topics that we were today about how to do
Is there
CD.
a link to that conversation? Perhaps
it's not published yet, but when it is, I'll be announcing it on LinkedIn. So if you want to follow me, go to my website, find me on there, and then you'll see.
So that's jhall.io for the source website, and then LinkedIn and everything from there.
Yep.
Okay, Jonathan. This has been lovely.
I've enjoyed it. Thanks.
This was a great conversation. It's very organic. You know, for those that don't know, this is very unscripted, very ad-lib. So yeah, thank you for your time. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And to our listeners, thank you for listening. Thank you for checking in. I hope this was enjoyable and educational. Links are in the doodly-doo, subscribe, notification bells, all that jazz, you know, algorithm stuff. So thank you. See you next time.
Cheers.